Content creators and bloggers are able to give perspective, but that's not always the truth, right? And so it is what we are able to do with this information as we analyze trends, as we analyze what our personal experiences, and being able to apply it that way. Media literacy is important because this allows us to know how to identify what is a good source of news, what is a bad source of news, and what we should be essentially citing as we're going through this, right? We're going to look at how media literacy, or lack thereof, has actually been impacting our society a lot more in terms of how we live in an era of disinformation and misinformation and knowing how to critically engage with work. So, first and foremost, I'll tell you a little story time with a Negro. That's going to be the section that we started off today. I'll then give you a little bit more of a larger framework. From there, I will then ask some questions, but also answer them as I'm kind of doing like this metacognitive situation going on here, and then be able to end off with the episode with a couple of my thoughts as well. So the question we'll be thinking about today is, how has the lack of media literacy impacted our ability to dissect information no matter where it comes from? But we shall start off story time with a Negro. So I was born in 1995, and this is the era that the internet is just starting to make an entry point, right? And so I didn't necessarily grow up with the internet. I grew up with going up outside, hanging out with friends and all of that. But also, you know, the AOL, the dial-up, you can't use your phone if you're on the internet, wait, all of that stuff, right? And so there was a time where I actually had to like be patient and get to the internet. There wasn't always a time for this information to be readily at my hands. I did not always have a phone. I did not have my own phone until I was in like 8th or 9th grade. And even then you couldn't use it all the time because your data was super limited. And so it was super, super fascinating as I thought around the advent of the internet, and more particularly in social media. Growing up, there was such a huge push in our school to just be like, you need to know how to read media. You need to know how to understand what is a good source from a fake source and know how to find information. And I think about that all the time because I'm just like, yo, we need to sit with information. We needed to read information. We needed to know how to determine what is a good article from a bad article. What is an opinion? What is satire versus hard news? What is soft news? What is entertainment news? And the purpose of each. Was it to inform? Was it to entertain? Was it to persuade? Do you know these different forms of media and how they will approach them differently? And I've always been fascinated by it, but I didn't know that that's what I would lean into a little bit more as I got into my background of theater and broadcast communications. And broadcast communications allowed me to be in a space that I was consistently interacting with news. I was consistently interacting with different forms of media, entertainment, and all the different perspectives on how they are navigating, right? And so as I am going through this, I understood and began to have a skill set that became second nature. I was reflective on what they taught us growing up, but also as social media became a much more of a dominant force, we had to know how to navigate differently. And honestly, even the FCC has not even caught up with how do we handle social media? How do we handle podcasters? How do we handle these different forms of media in terms of like credibility, in terms of what is news, what is the journalistic integrity, what is all of this stuff? That all matters, right? As we are looking at who is able to dissect what is the news and how is it being broadcasted out to masses of people. Now, I am concerned with the inability to honestly understand news, especially if we're in an era where I want to listen to who I agree with. If I'm in an era of, yo, there's the truth, there's my truth, there's your truth. All of that stuff is in conversation with each other because this is how we will then ultimately know how to move forward. But there is this aspect that people do not know how to dissect real from fake anymore. And I knew this to be true because as soon as that clip with Chloe came out and she was getting back shots, guess what the internet did? Oh, well, I knew it. This is going to be what she's going to be doing now. And this is that and the third. And in reality, there was a section of people who truly believed that she was actually having sex. And the fact that people were not able to discern that because you don't know the difference of fiction and reality TV, and even understanding that reality TV is still like an extreme version of like the truth, is bugged out to me. If you're unable to do that, I'm just irritated at this point with you. But my frustration, think it leads into like a larger issue. And so for me, I think a lot of the issue is that media literacy has gone by the wayside because of how quickly we digest information, how often we're digesting information, and how much we don't like sitting with it. We don't have the stamina to read it for long periods of time anymore. And that's what I'm looking at for the next generation is like, yo, the ability to read and be able to dissect and be able to critically analyze a piece of work does not exist right now. And that's what worries me, especially as I teach English, right? That is concerning. And so I'm wondering, how are other schools experiencing this lack of media literacy? How do we make it a forefront of conversation again and not just like a niche topic for like independent schools and stuff like that? This all has to be integrated, because if the kids are unable to decide what is real from what is fake, then that's going to be difficult. And I'm going back to 2016 with Trump. I think Trump played a significant role in how we are interacting with media and how it has become so polarized in terms of what we believe. But what's important first is that we're all working from the same definition. So I'm going to start with the definition. Then I'm going to talk around Trump and how he's really impacting a lot of this space and how he exists 7 years later and how we are having to navigate today. Media literacy is the ability to identify different types of media and understand the messages they're sending. Kids take in a huge amount of information from a wide array of sources and far beyond traditional media. So this is TV, radio, newspapers, magazines, but also social media now is a space where you can get information and perspective and commentary and quote unquote news of what all of this looks like. In this, it is important for us to be working from that definition of how we're interacting with it, so we all know where we are going along with it. So let's just get into this conversation. Whether it's Hillary Clinton as the leader of the child porn ring hidden as a pizza restaurant, or the German federal chancellor Angela Merkel posing for a selfie with an Islamist assassin, inconvenient news, quote unquote, is spreading online. Such news, quote unquote, might be a shock for some. Others might nod in agreement, but these are simply not true. In a common context, such news is called fake news. In the past few years, it has come up more and more. During the 2016 U.S. presidential campaign, the term began used extremely widely, and we know this is being used by DJT. Screw that man. But he was also misusing the term. Mostly for everything which is not his opinion. Google ended up trending and shows that fake news has been used more and more since the election of November 2016 in terms of Google's trends. That is why it's crucial for journalists right now to know the term's origins and how to classify this kind of quote-unquote news. Kovacs and Rosenthal said that the news should provide independent, reliable, accurate, and comprehensive information. Additionally, the news as an output of journalism should always be true. And so this is the part where I do appreciate that the journalistic integrity is simply answering the questions who, what, when, where, how. That's it. You take that information and do what you want with it. You get to apply your own thinking into it. You get to determine how you feel about that news based on objective information. Objective information and how you're able to utilize that and what does that actually mean. Objective information. I'm repeating this term because that is important to understand how we have to be able to navigate in these spaces. Content creators and bloggers are able to give perspective, but that's not always the truth, right? And so it is what we are able to do with this information as we analyze trends, as we analyze what our personal experience is and being able to apply it that way. Media literacy is important because this allows us to know how to identify what is a good source of news, what is a bad source of news, and what we should be essentially citing as we're going through this, right? And to me, it's why the idea of fake news is an oxymoron. If you go to the Oxford English Dictionary, it defines fake as an activity or action, typically one characterized by dishonesty or deception. Furthermore, there is no common definition of fake news. A lot of people noted that the discourse about fake news is a time when is a part of terms misinformation and disinformation. And for journalists, it is currently a necessity to distinguish the difference in the phenomena, right? And it's important to be able to distinguish that because we do need to know what is this idea of misinformation and disinformation, because this is what's happening to our people. Black and brown people are being served disinformation regularly, which is beginning to radicalize and cause a very extreme binary in terms of how we are able to articulate points and opinions. Because if you're consistently going down the rabbit hole of Reddit and you're trying to find the information and you're constantly going through these moments of periods of time where articles are trying to radicalize you or it's giving you a very extreme point, this means, right, that you're only looking for a very particular source of information that'll ultimately get you to a space of either far right or too far left, but never getting to a point of a potential productive conversation that we're all leaning with the same objective information. News has become a space where people want to be able to be subjective, and we are no longer following the who, what, when, where, and how. We are following the person whose why we believe in the most. We are following the person whose why we believe in the most. You have a platform, you have influence, which means you have something of value to say, yet you have no expertise in this space. You actually don't know how to communicate this information properly, because at this point, journalism is in a very unique space and a very scary space, because people don't actually know how to engage with it in a way that feels meaningful, in a way that is actually productive. But also, we don't know what the journalistic integrity is anymore. Because right now, people need quick clicks. Right now, people need to overconsume. Right now, people are just taking in information in a way that humans are not designed to take in information. So, as we are thinking around the issues around the lack of media literacy, I think about, where does this actually start? Whose job is it? And it took me back to just thinking around how my teachers were so integral. My social studies teacher, my English teacher, this was all part of a very important conversation. Our governments and economics teacher taught us how to analyze information with the stuff that we had, and knowing how to create a very critical and concrete opinion or thoughts around the information we're presented, because now we have an opportunity to know what to do with that information. And we get to act on our own. We don't have to tell people how to act, which is funny being a content creator, because now I'm able to give perspective and have a platform and people are following me based on what I say. But I know that challenge is always necessary, right? Hey, Marquise, I know you said this thing, but did you look at this article? Did you look at this fuller definition? Did this actually have the fullest opinion that could have been constructed? That's important when you're engaging with anybody who's a content creator. You cannot take everything as truth. You can enjoy their perspective. You can see how this perspective can be beneficial or not beneficial. But the fact of the matter is, we're living in an era of content creation and knowing how to be responsible with a platform and knowing how to deliver news, if that is the space that you're in. If you're a social justice-based podcast, knowing how to do that. But some of these gossip blogs, some of these bloggers, some of these other content creators don't care about that and don't care to have responsibility over that. And I'm concerned, because if the majority of these kids are no longer engaging with a newspaper or engaging with news stations and local news stations and investigative journalism, there is no way for them to be able to decipher what is fact and what is fiction. That is scary to live in if you have an inability to distinguish the two, and knowing what is a space of education and what is a space of entertainment, right? Because now this makes it difficult when we get into our political debates. It does make it a little bit more of an issue when we need to think around who we're voting for. It does turn into like, who do I like the most and who resonates with me, rather than like, what are they actually doing, right? And so if you're unable to compare that because you're just like, well, this person's politic is off, but this is what they can also do, that is difficult. People were able to elect a Trump because he was able to appeal to the ethos of a lot of these white people, some of these right-leaning people, and he was popular and he had a platform. So all of that is important because he was able to meticulously use the media in order to manipulate it into getting to what he wanted. And I think that is particularly harmful and dangerous as we are going through engaging in content, engaging in news, and then having to articulate opinions and debates, but not knowing how to properly cite, not knowing what is true, not knowing any of this. But it's a skill that has to be taught. And so as I'm even thinking around that, there is an article that talks around digital literacy and how it's showing up in schools. And so Sean Lee, a high school social studies teacher in Seattle, wants to see more lessons on the internet akin to the kind of the 21st century driver's education and essential for modern life. Lee has tried to bring that kind of education into his classroom with lessons about the need to double check online sources, to diversify news feeds, and to bring critical thinking to the web. He also created an organization for other teachers to share resources. This technology is so new that no one is taught how to use it, Lee said. And I think that part in particular is necessary to understand because technology and digital media moves quickly. It was only until 2018 where we had to take social media serious and knowing how to use it properly. And now, even in the era of the podcaster and content creator, it's now like, yo, what can we sue somebody for? How often must we say allegedly? What is this look like? What is the balance of news and commentary? All of that matters. And so Lee continues and he goes, people like to say are like, there's nothing we can do. And they throw their hands up in the air. He actually disagrees with that. He would like to think that the republic can survive an algorithm, that people can survive an algorithm. Lee's efforts are part of a growing movement of educators and misinformation and disinformation researchers who are working to offset the explosion of the online disinformation about everything from presidential politics to the pandemic. So far, the U.S. lags many other democracies in this waging battle, and the consequences of inaction are clear. I am wholeheartedly in agreement with that as I am navigating youth, as I am a teacher, as I am asking kids to have to engage with nonfiction. And it is scary to see how much it takes to convince somebody now of like, yo, this is just the truth. This is just a fact. This is what an actual news article looks like. And so almost having to fight to convince them of what is true or convince them of how to navigate has all been part of an unlearning process and also teaching them. It shouldn't just exist in an English class. It does need to exist in the humanities overall, in social studies classes, history courses, knowing how to analyze text, whether fiction, nonfiction. And all of these skills are necessary, but it is good to start learning that in school. It is good for us to start building out these muscles because in a world that's going to continue to grow in how information is spread, if we don't have that, we're going to live in a world where people don't know how to engage in the news, how people will not be able to tell something that is what's real life. And also just knowing like there's such a lack of interactions where people's morals and their ethics are being shifted, twirled, contorted, all of this, because fact of the matter is we don't know anymore who to trust. There's a space of distrust, there's a space of disinformation, and there's a space of how it became so extreme that nobody is truly engaging critically anymore. And I don't think anybody wants to engage critically anymore, because what does that mean? What does that mean for me? What does that mean for you? What does that mean for politics? What does that mean for policy? What does that mean for developing business? What does that mean for engaging in genuine conversation with other people? I'm scared. I don't know what the further impact this will be moving forward, but I do know that if you're not engaging with content that's more than 30 seconds on TikTok, if you're not looking at the algorithm and seeing how it's just giving you repeated information, and if you just take that information passively and continuously ingest it, then you start to believe it as true. If you don't know how to analyze information and articles, that is scary. We need to know how to do this in a way that is smart, strategic, and moves the needle for everybody. I don't know if we've gotten there yet, but I do think that there is hope for us to start really interrogating this and interrogating the youth and seeing what they are looking at, and honestly starting to interrogate adults who have platforms and people who have platforms and are using them unethically. You're using them to spread misinformation and disinformation in order to create either a particular kind of space that you want, incite violence, incite dissension, whatever that thing is. But we do need to start knowing how to move accordingly. What is the difference of a content creator, a credible journalist versus a blogger? What does it look like to actually engage with a piece of news? What does it look like for us to take more time with the truth? What does it look like for us to sit there and know how to reckon what this is, and knowing how to take this information and know where we need to apply it or how to communicate it to other people? All of these skills matter. All of this matters. And so let me know your thoughts on the state of media literacy. What do you think we should be doing? Should it be embedded in curriculum and being taught since kindergarten because kids have phones in their hand as soon as they come out the womb? Or is it something that should remain very niche? Again, you know my thoughts on it, but I would love to know your thoughts on it. What do you think about this episode? I'll make sure to put some links in the description box below. I appreciate you all for engaging in this conversation. Let me know your thoughts. I will see y'all next week. This is This American Negro. Peace.